My grandfather left me a sealed safe with one rule: don't open it until I'm gone. When we finally opened it, he was standing right behind us. Yeah, you heard that right, and no, this ain't some ghost story, this is real life. And real life is way messier than anything you read on the internet. So look, let me take you back, way back, 1998. I was 12 years old, scrawny kid, freckles, always had my nose in a comic book. And my grandfather, his name was Arthur, but everyone called him Artie, even me, even when I got older. Artie, just Artie. Artie was the kind of man who built his own house. Literally, poured the foundation with his own two hands. Drove the same pickup truck for 40 years. A 1972 Ford, blue, faded, sounded like a tractor, and he had this laugh, this big booming laugh that shook the walls. You could hear him from 3 rooms away, and when he laughed, you laughed, it was contagious, like a cold you actually wanted. Now Artie wasn't rich, not even close, he was a mechanic. Owned a little shop in a town so small it didn't even have a stoplight. Just a blinking yellow light at the intersection of Main and, well, also Main, that's how small it was. But here's the thing about Artie, everyone in that town owed him something, a favor, a loan, a kindness. He fixed Mrs. Henderson's transmission for free when her husband got sick. He let the Miller kids eat dinner at his house every Tuesday for 10 years because their mom was working double shifts. He was just good. In a world that doesn't reward good, he was good anyway, and I was his favorite. I know, every grandkid thinks they're the favorite, but with Artie, it was different. I spent every summer at his house, every single one. From the time I was 6 until I was 17, he taught me how to change oil, how to fish, how to cook a steak so rare it mooed, and he taught me something else too, something he never said out loud but showed me every single day. He taught me that character is what you do when nobody's watching. Now, fast forward 2018, I'm 32 years old, living in the city, working a job I hate, sales, cold calls, 9 to 5, actually. More like 8 to 7, and I get a call from my mom, and her voice is shaking. She says, Artie's in the hospital, heart trouble, and I need to come home right now, so I drive 6 hours straight through, don't stop. Don't eat, just drive, and I get to this hospital in the middle of nowhere, and I walk into his room, and there's Artie, lying in this bed that looks too big for him, tubes everywhere, machines beeping, and he looks small. For the first time in my life, my grandfather looks small, and he sees me, and that big booming laugh, it's gone, but his eyes light up, and he reaches out this bony hand, and he says, there's my boy, just like that. Like I was still 12, like I still had freckles and comic books, so I sit down, and we talk for hours about everything, about life, about my job, about the girl I was dating who didn't work out, about his truck, about the shop, and then he gets serious, and he says, I need you to do something for me. And I say, anything, and he points to the corner of the room, and there's this safe, not a big one, maybe 2 feet tall. 1 foot wide, old, rusted around the edges, heavy, the kind of safe you see in old Western movies, and he says, that safe goes home with you today, you don't open it, you don't shake it, you don't even think about what's inside. You put it in your closet and you wait, and I say, wait for what? And he looks at me, and those eyes that had seen 84 years of life, they were sharp, sharper than I'd ever seen them, and he says, you wait until I'm gone, that's the rule, one rule, don't open it until I'm gone, you understand? And I nod because, it's Artie, I'd walk through fire for this man. Of course I understand, so the nurse wheels in a cart. We load up the safe, it's heavier than it looks, like, way heavier, I'm thinking. What's in this thing? Gold, cash, family heirlooms, but I don't ask because the rule is the rule. I get it home, put it in my closet, and I try to forget about it. I really do, but you know how it is. You put something in your closet, and it whispers to you, every morning, every night, every time you reach for a shirt, it's there. This big metal box of mystery just sitting there, and I tell myself, Artie's fine, he's tough, he'll outlive us all, but 2 months later, I get another call, and this time, my mom isn't shaking, she's crying hard, and she says, he's gone, Artie's gone, and the world just stops, you know that feeling. When someone tells you something and your brain refuses to process it, like the words bounce off your skull, that's what it was. Artie, gone, no way. This man survived a house fire in 1963. He fell off a roof in 1985. He ate gas station sushi in 2002 and didn't even get a stomach ache. He couldn't be gone, but he was, the funeral was, it was something else. See, Artie was loved, I mean. Really loved, the church was packed, standing room only, people drove from 3 states away. The Miller kids, now grown adults with kids of their own, they were there, Mrs. Henderson, 92 years old in a wheelchair, she was there. The mayor was there, and me, I was a mess, barely holding it together. And then I noticed something, the family, Artie's family, my family. And I don't know if you've ever been to a funeral where people are already talking about money before the body is even in the ground. But let me tell you, it's disgusting, it's vile, and it was happening right in front of me. My Uncle Rick, Artie's oldest son, 55 years old, never worked a day he didn't have to, always had a scheme. Always had a business opportunity. He was standing by the coffin, literally standing by the coffin, whispering to my cousin Derek, and I heard him say, the house alone has to be worth 300 grand. And that's before whatever's in that safe. And my blood ran cold, that safe. How did he know about the safe? See, I never told anyone, not my mom, not my girlfriend, no one. That was between me and Artie, but somehow, Rick knew. And then my Aunt
Nancy, my house
Linda,
in my neighborhood,
Artie's
supposedly
daughter,
200 minutes
married
solid
3
before it turns
times,
into liquid.
each one
So,
richer
picture
than
this,
the
it's Tuesday
last.
afternoon,
She was
95%
wearing
chance today,
sunglasses
glass candy
inside,
bright red. So I'm in a
crying,
shirt that used to
but
be white,
not
but is now
really
this weird
crying,
translucent
you
gray
know
color,
the type.
staring at my neighbor Gary.
The kind of
Over time,
crying
plows
you
through seeing
do when
actual
you
dead
want
bodies buried
people
20
to
years
see
ago,
you
of course. My
crying.
looking dead in the
And
eye,
she
my
was
head is shaking.
telling
My
anyone
heart is
who
doing that
would
thing where it feels like
listen.
it's trying to speak, but it
Daddy
froze. And I
always
say,
said
Gary,
I'd
I need
get the
your help.
china,
I've already
the
discovered that
antique
200 pounds solid
china,
not before
from
it
his
turns into
mother's
liquid. Now, before
collection.
you judge
He
me, before you
promised
jump to
me.
conclusions and think
And
you
I
figured out where this
wanted to
story is going,
scream.
just know that in that
I
exact
wanted
moment,
to
Gary
grab her
stays
by the
focusing on your
shoulders
unforgettable
and
moment
shake her
with
and
his eyes become
say,
relaxed to
he's
white,
not
to
even
narrow.
in the
It's just
ground
in the
yet.
half a
Can you
second. Take a
wait?
step
Can
back,
you
he's right here.
just
His dominant
wait?
hand, the one
But
that
I
probably
didn't,
used to rest
because
on his
I'm
nervous
not a
button back in the
screamer,
day,
I'm a
clicks towards
stewer,
his
I
stomach, and he
stew.
looks at me like
I
I
let
just
it
confessed
boil
to something that made me
inside,
even
and
news.
then.
And the craziest
Then
part,
I do
is immediately
something
we realize why he's
stupid.
looking at me like
After the funeral, after the burial, after everyone goes back to Artie's house for the wake, I'm standing in the kitchen, eating a sandwich I don't taste, and Rick comes up behind me. And he puts his hand on my shoulder and he says, "So, the safe," and I freeze and I turn around and I look at him and I say, "What about it?" And he smiles, this greasy smile, the kind of smile that doesn't reach his eyes. And he says, "Come on, nephew, don't play dumb. Dad told me about it before he passed. He told me he gave it to you and he told me, what's inside, it changes everything." And my heart is pounding. Because Artie never told me what was inside, not a clue, not a hint, and now Rick is saying, it changes everything, what does that even mean? And I say, I don't know what you're talking about. And Rick laughs, this dry, hollow laugh. And he says, sure you don't, but here's the thing, Dad's will, it gets read tomorrow, and whatever's in that safe, it might make that will irrelevant, so I'm just saying, maybe we open it tonight, before the lawyers get involved. Before Linda and her shark of a husband start claiming things that don't belong to them. Maybe, we look inside together, you and me, family, and I should have said no, I know I should have said no, but here's the thing about curiosity. It's not just about wanting to know, it's about needing to know. It's about that itch in your brain that won't go away until you scratch it. And Rick, he knew exactly how to scratch it, so I said, let me think about it, and he nodded, and he walked away, and I stood there in that kitchen, surrounded by people eating casseroles and talking about the weather and pretending they weren't already dividing up a dead man's life like vultures on a carcass. And I looked at that safe, in my mind, in my closet 6 hours away, and I thought, what if Rick's right? What if there's something in there that changes everything? What if Artie wanted me to open it? What if the rule wasn't really a rule? What if? And that's when my mom found me and she looked at me and she knew moms always know and she said, don't, whatever Rick is selling, don't buy it. Your grandfather gave you that safe for a reason. And the reason wasn't so you could open it with Rick breathing down your neck. And I nodded, but I didn't really hear her because the itch was getting worse. That night I couldn't sleep. I was staying at Artie's house in my old room. The same bed I'd slept in every summer, and I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about the safe, and I thought about Artie's voice, don't open it until I'm gone, and I thought, he is gone, the rule is satisfied, right? I mean, technically. He's gone, so technically, I could open it right now tonight just to peek, just to see, just to know, and I got out of bed, and I walked to the closet, and I stood there in the dark, staring at this rusted metal box. And my hands were shaking, actually shaking, like I was cold, but I wasn't cold, I was something else, excited, scared, alive, and I reached for the dial, and I stopped because I heard something, a creak, floorboards. And I turned around, and there was my mom standing in the doorway in her nightgown, looking at me like I'd just slapped her, and she didn't say anything, she just looked, and then she walked away, and I felt small. Like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. And I went back to bed, and I didn't sleep, not for a second. The next morning, the will reading at the lawyer's office. Mr. Patterson, old guy, been Artie's lawyer for 30 years. Glasses so thick they looked like bottle bottoms. And he sat us all down, Rick, Linda, her husband, me, my mom, a few cousins, and he opened a folder, and he started to read, and it was normal at first. The house went to my mom. Because she was the only one who actually visited. The truck went to me, because Artie knew I'd keep it running. The shop went to Rick, because Artie believed in second chances, even for people who didn't deserve them. And Linda got the china because apparently he actually did promise her. And then Mr. Patterson got to the last paragraph and he cleared his throat and he looked at me and he said, to my grandson, I leave the safe. And everything inside it with one condition. He must open it in the presence of the entire family, on the day of my funeral, not before, not after, on that day. And if he opens it before, he gets nothing. And the contents are donated to charity. And the room exploded. Rick jumped up. Linda started yelling. Her husband was on his phone, probably calling his own lawyer. And me, I just sat there, stunned because Artie knew. He knew I was tempted, he knew Rick would pressure me, he knew the family would be vultures, and he built a fail-safe, literally, a fail-safe, and Rick, he turned to me, and his face was red, and he said, you knew about this condition. And you were going to open it last night, weren't you? You were going to cut us all out. And I looked at him, and I said, I didn't know, I swear I didn't know, and I didn't open it. And Linda, she laughed, this bitter, angry laugh. And she said, of course you didn't, because Mommy caught you. If she hadn't, we'd all be screwed right now, wouldn't we? And I wanted to defend myself, but I couldn't because she was right. If my mom hadn't stopped me, I would have opened it and I would have lost everything. Not that I even knew what everything was, but still. So Mr. Patterson calmed everyone down and he said, the funeral was yesterday. The condition says the safe must be opened on the day of the funeral. That day has passed, therefore, the condition cannot be met. The contents will be donated to charity, as specified in the will, and Rick, he sat down hard. Like the air had been punched out of him. And Linda, she started crying, real tears this time, not the fake stuff. And I felt numb, like I was watching a movie of my own life from far away, and then Mr. Patterson did something weird. He smiled, this tiny, almost hidden smile, and he said, unless the family agrees to a second funeral, a private one today this afternoon at the house if we hold a second service. Then today becomes the day of the funeral and the condition is satisfied. and everyone looked at each other, and Rick said, "A second funeral? That's ridiculous. Who does that?" And Mr. Patterson shrugged, and he said, "Arthur specified this option. He said, if the family can't agree to come together one more time, then they don't deserve what's in the safe." He said, "Family is everything, but only when they act like one," and I felt it. Right in my chest, a lump, a big, painful lump, because Artie was still teaching us, even from beyond the grave. He was giving us one last chance, one last test, to see if we could be a family just for one afternoon, and Rick. He looked at Linda, and Linda looked at her husband, and her husband looked at his phone, and then, slowly, one by one, they nodded, not because they wanted to, not because they cared about family, but because they wanted what was in that safe. And that was enough for Artie, or at least, it was enough for the condition. So that afternoon, we all went back to the house, and we stood in the living room around the safe, which I'd brought from my apartment that morning. And Mr. Patterson was there, and he had a letter from Artie sealed, and he said, "Arthur instructed me to read this before the safe is opened." He said, "If they're all here, if they all came, read this first. If anyone is missing, don't open the safe and donate everything to charity." And he looked around, counting heads: Rick, Linda, her husband, me, my mom, 3 cousins, and Mr. Patterson himself. Everyone was there, and he broke the seal. And he unfolded the letter, and he started to read, and Artie's voice, it filled the room like he was right there, like he was standing next to me. And this is what he said: "If you're hearing this, it means you all came, and that means there's still hope, because I didn't leave you money, I didn't leave you gold, I didn't leave you jewels, I left you something better, I left you a choice. The safe is empty, has been from the start, but the combination is the date of your mother's birthday, Rick and Linda. The key is hidden in the Bible on the shelf, the one your grandmother read from every night, and to my grandson, you held the safe, you protected it, you resisted temptation. And that is the real inheritance, not what's inside, but what you proved about yourself, about your character." And the room was silent, so silent you could hear the clock ticking, and Rick, he looked at the safe, and he looked at the letter. And he said, "Empty, it's empty, we came here for nothing." And Mr. Patterson said, "Not for nothing, you came, all of you together, for the first time in 20 years, that was the point." And Linda, she walked to the shelf, and she pulled down the Bible, and she opened it, and there was a key tucked inside Psalm 23. "The Lord is my shepherd," and she held it, and she cried, really cried, not for the china, not for the money, but for the grandmother she'd forgotten. The one who read to her from this book every night until she was 10, and Rick, he sat down on the couch, and he put his head in his hands, and he didn't say anything for a long time, and then, he laughed this small, broken laugh. And he said, "The old man got us, he really got us." And I looked at the safe, and I thought about all those nights, staring at it, wondering, dreaming, and I realized, Artie didn't just teach me about character, he showed me. In the most elaborate, ridiculous, beautiful way possible, he showed me that the things we think we want, the money, the gold, the treasure, they're nothing compared to the person we become while we're waiting for them. But here's the thing. The story doesn't end there, because, remember when I said, when we finally opened it, he was standing behind us? Yeah, that part, I haven't told you that part yet, so we're all in the living room, stunned, silent, processing. And the front door opens, and we all turn, and there, standing in the doorway, is Artie, not a ghost, not a hallucination, Artie in the flesh, 84 years old, wearing his favorite flannel shirt. The blue one with the coffee stain on the pocket, and he's leaning on a cane, and he's smiling, that big booming smile, the one that shakes walls, and my mom screams, actually screams, and Rick falls off the couch, and Linda drops the Bible. And me, I just stand there, mouth open, eyes wide, because, what? And Artie, he walks in, slowly, leaning on that cane, and he says, "Close your mouths, you'll catch flies." And nobody moves, nobody breathes. And he sits down in his favorite chair, the recliner by the window, the one that's been there since 1980, and he looks at us, and he says, I know, you're confused, you're angry, you're probably thinking I've lost my mind. And maybe I have, but let me explain, before anyone calls the cops or an ambulance." And he tells us the whole story 2 months ago when he was in the hospital. He wasn't dying, not really, he had a heart condition, sure. But it was manageable, treatable. The doctors told him he had years left, maybe 5, maybe 10, but Artie looked around that hospital room, and he saw the future, he saw himself actually dying, and he saw us. His family gathering around his actual deathbed, and he didn't like what he imagined. He didn't like what he knew we'd become, because here's the truth about my family. We weren't close, not really. We saw each other at Christmas. And even then, it was tense. Someone always left angry. Someone always said something they shouldn't, and Artie, he watched it happen year after year, and he thought, when I'm gone, it's going to be worse. They're going to tear each other apart. Over my stuff, over my money, over things that don't matter, so he made a decision, a crazy decision. The kind of decision only Artie would make. He decided to die early, not literally, but socially. He called Mr. Patterson. He called a funeral home he trusted. He called a doctor who owed him a favor from 1975, and he planned it, every detail. The hospital stay, the announcement, the funeral, the will, the safe, all of it, one big, elaborate, ridiculous test. And the doctor, he signed the death certificate because Artie paid him. No, because Artie asked him, as a friend, as someone who understood what Artie was trying to do. And the funeral home. They buried an empty casket because Artie asked them to, because in a small town, people do things for Artie, because Artie had done things for them, and for 2 months, Artie hid in a cabin in the woods, 20 miles from town, no phone. No TV, just a radio and books and his thoughts, and he waited. He waited to see what we'd do. He waited to see if we'd come together, or if we'd fall apart, and he watched from a distance, through friends, through neighbors, through the grapevine that only exists in small towns. He heard about Rick pressuring me. He heard about Linda's sunglasses. He heard about the casseroles and the arguments and the whispered conversations, and he was disappointed. But not surprised, but then, he heard something else. He heard that I didn't open the safe, that I resisted, that my mom stopped me, that we came together for a second funeral, that we read his letter, that we cried, that we laughed. That we were a family for one afternoon, finally, and he decided. It was time to come back, time to reveal the truth, time to see our faces, and let me tell you, our faces were priceless. Rick, he was the first to speak. And he said, "Dad, you faked your own death, that's insane, that's illegal, that's," and Artie interrupted him and he said, "That's love, that's what this is, I love you, Rick, I love all of you. But I don't love who you are when money is involved, and I needed to know, is there anything left, anything worth saving, or are we just a group of people who share DNA and resentment?" And Linda, she walked over to him. And she knelt down and she took his hand and she said, "You scared us, you really scared us, I thought you were gone, and I realized, I don't care about the China, I don't care about any of it, I just want you here," and she cried, and Artie, he patted her head like she was a little girl again and he said, "I know, that's why I did it, because sometimes, you have to lose something. To remember what it actually means to you." And then he looked at me and he said, "You didn't open it, even when Rick offered you, what, partnership, a cut, what did he offer you?" And I laughed, this nervous, shaky laugh, and I said, "He didn't offer me anything specific, just curiosity, he sold me curiosity." And Artie nodded and he said, "Curiosity is a powerful drug, and you resisted, that means something, that means everything, because in this life, you're going to be tempted every day by money, by power, by easy answers, and the person who can say no, even when no one would know, that's the person I want to leave my real legacy to." And he reached into his pocket. And he pulled out an envelope and he handed it to me, and I opened it, and inside was a key, not to the safe was empty, remember, this was a different key, and a letter, and the letter said, "This key opens the lockbox at the shop. Under the counter, in it, you'll find the deed to the house, the title to the truck, and $5,000 in cash, not because you need it, but because you earned it, by being the person I always believed you were." And I looked at him. And I said, "Artie, I can't, this is too much." And he waved his hand, dismissed me, like he always did when I got emotional, and he said, "It's not too much, it's exactly enough, the house, fix it up, live in it, or sell it. I don't care, the truck, drive it or let it rust, your choice, the money, buy something stupid or save it, again, your choice, but the key is the real gift, because it represents something, trust, I trust you with everything. And that's worth more than gold." And the room was quiet again, but different this time, not the stunned silence of before, but a warm silence, a full silence, the kind of silence that happens when everything that needs to be said has been said. But wait, because there's more, there's always more with Artie. Rick, he stood up and he walked over and he looked at his father and he said, "What about me, what about Linda, what do we get?" And Artie, he didn't get angry. He didn't yell, he just looked sad for a moment and he said, "You get what you always had, my love, my forgiveness, my hope that you'll change, but you don't get my trust, not yet, because trust is earned. And you both spent years spending it, like it was unlimited, like I'd always refill the account, but I won't, not anymore, from now on, you earn it or you don't have it." And Rick, he nodded slowly and he said, "Fair, that's fair. I don't like it, but it's fair." And Linda, she hugged her father for a long time, and nobody said anything, because what do you say? What do you say to a man who died so you could learn how to live? And then Artie did something that still makes me laugh. He stood up slowly with his cane, and he walked to the kitchen, and he opened the fridge, and he pulled out a beer, and he said, "Anyone else? Or am I drinking alone at my own funeral?" And we all laughed, this big, relieved, confused, grateful laugh, and we drank beers in the living room around an empty safe, with a man who was supposed to be dead, and we talked for hours. About everything, about the past, about the future, about who we wanted to be, and that night, I drove back to the city in Artie's truck. The 1972 Ford, blue, faded, sounded like a tractor, and I cried. The whole 6 hours, not sad tears, not happy tears, just tears, because I realized something. I realized that my grandfather, this mechanic from a town without a stoplight, he was the smartest man I'd ever met. Not because he knew engines or built houses, but because he understood people. He understood that we're all weak, we're all tempted, we're all capable of being vultures, but we're also capable of being better if someone gives us a reason. If someone believes in us enough to test us, even when it's crazy, even when it's illegal, even when it scares the living daylights out of everyone involved. And the moral of the story, look, I'm not saying you should fake your own death, please don't, that's a terrible idea and probably a felony, but I'm saying this, the things we think matter, the money, the stuff, the inheritance, they're distractions. They're shiny objects that pull our eyes away from what actually counts, and what actually counts is who you are when nobody's watching, when there's a safe in your closet and you could open it and no one would know. When someone offers you a shortcut and the only price is your integrity, when the world is telling you to take, and you choose to wait. Character isn't built in the spotlight, it's built in the dark, in the quiet moments. In the decisions no one sees, and my grandfather, he knew that, so he built me a test in the shape of a rusted metal box, and I failed it 100 times in my mind, but I passed it once in reality, and once, it turns out, is enough. Artie died for real 2 years later, peacefully, in his sleep, in that same recliner by the window, and this time, there was no scheme, no fake funeral, just a real one, and we were all there, together, not as vultures, but as family, and we didn't argue about the china, or the truck, or the house, we just remembered him and laughed and cried and told stories, and at the burial, I looked at that coffin, and I whispered, I didn't open it. I never opened it, not even after, because the rule wasn't about the safe, it was about me, and I got it, finally I got it, and I like to think, somewhere, he heard me, and that big booming laugh, it shook the walls of heaven. Or whatever's up there, and he said, there's my boy, and he was right, I was his boy, and I always will be, so that's the story, the whole story, from start to finish. 1998 to 2020, 22 years. One safe, one rule, and one man who loved his family enough to scare the absolute heck out of them. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. And if you have a grandparent still around, call them right now, don't wait. Because the real treasure, it's not in the safe, it's in the voice on the other end of the line, trust me. My boss fired me for stealing the company's top client. The next morning, he realized who that client actually was, and I swear to you, the look on his face when it all came crashing down. That look was worth every single second of the nightmare he put me through. So grab your coffee, settle in because this one is a ride. So look, let me take you back, way back, 2019, I was 26 years old. Fresh-faced, eager, the kind of guy who still believed that hard work got you ahead, that showing up early and staying late meant something, that your boss actually noticed. Yeah, I was adorable, I know. I had just landed this job at a mid-sized logistics company. Let's call them Velocity Solutions, because that's the kind of corny name these places love. Velocity Solutions, like we were moving at the speed of light. In reality, we were moving at the speed of a clogged printer. But hey, the paycheck was decent, the benefits were okay, and the commute was only 20 minutes, so I took it. And my boss, his name was Bradley, but everyone called him Brad. And Brad he was something else. Imagine if a used car salesman and a motivational poster had a baby. That was Brad. He wore suits that were just a little too shiny. He smiled at you in a way that made your skin crawl. And he had this habit of calling everyone champ, or buddy, or my personal favorite, sport. Hey sport, can you rework these numbers by 5? Champ, the client needs this yesterday. Buddy, I'm gonna need you to come in on Saturday. And here's the thing about Brad, he wasn't just annoying, he was incompetent, like, genuinely, breathtakingly incompetent. He had risen to his position not because he was good at his job, but because he was good at taking credit for other people's work. He was a master of the corporate magic trick. He'd watch you pull a rabbit out of a hat, and then somehow convince the CEO that he was the one holding the hat. And the rabbit and the wand. I figured this out pretty quick within my first 3 months, but I didn't say anything because I was new, because I needed the job, because my rent wasn't going to pay itself, so I kept my head down. I did the work, I let Brad take the credit, and I told myself, it's fine, it's just how corporate America works. You put in your time, you learn the ropes, and eventually, you move up or you move out. But then I met Marcus. Marcus was a client, or at least, that's what we thought he was. He walked into our office on a Tuesday morning in March 2020, right before everything shut down for the pandemic. He was wearing a gray suit. Nothing fancy, nothing flashy, just clean, professional. He had a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen some miles, and he asked to speak to someone about handling his company's shipping needs. Now, at Velocity Solutions, the sales floor was divided into territories, and the big accounts, the whales, those went to the senior reps, the guys who had been there for 10 years, the guys who played golf with the clients and drank whiskey at corporate retreats. Guys like Brad, even though Brad wasn't technically in sales anymore. He was a manager, but he still kept his finger in every big pie because that's what parasites do. So when Marcus walked in, Brad was all over it. He swooped in like a hawk spotting a field mouse. He shook Marcus's hand with both of his. He laughed too loud at Marcus's jokes. He offered him coffee, water, a tour of the facility, the full treatment, and I watched from my cubicle. Because that's where I sat, in a cubicle, surrounded by gray fabric walls and the faint smell of microwave popcorn. But here's where it gets interesting. Marcus didn't want to talk to Brad. He looked right past him. Right past the shiny suit and the fake laugh, and he pointed at me from across the room and he said, I'll work with him. And Brad's face, oh man, Brad's face was a painting, confusion, annoyance, a little bit of rage. All mixed together behind that plastic smile, and he said, oh, well, he's pretty junior. Are you sure you don't want someone with more experience? And Marcus, he didn't even blink, he just said, I'm sure. He looks like someone who actually works. And that was it, that one sentence. That was the beginning of everything, so I became Marcus's account rep, and let me tell you, this account was huge, like company-changing huge. Marcus represented a manufacturing firm out of Chicago. Let's call them Apex Industries. And Apex Industries was looking to switch their entire logistics operation to a new provider. We're talking millions of dollars in annual revenue, the kind of contract that makes careers or breaks them, and I treated it like gold. I stayed up late researching their supply chain. I found inefficiencies in their current setup that they didn't even know existed. I built custom reports. I created projections. I did everything short of writing Marcus a love poem, because this was my shot. My one shot to prove that I wasn't just some cubicle drone, that I could actually do this job, that I could be more than Brad's errand boy. And Marcus, he was impressed. He told me so, in meetings over coffee. In emails that I still have saved to this day, he said things like, this level of detail is exactly what we've been missing, and you actually seem to care about our business, and my personal favorite. Bradley seems to delegate a lot to you. That's interesting, and I should have noticed that last one. I should have picked up on the way he said interesting, like it wasn't just a word, like it was a code, but I didn't. Because I was too busy being proud of myself, too busy imagining my future corner office, too busy dreaming about the promotion I was sure was coming, because here's the thing, in my mind, this was simple math. I bring in the biggest client the company has ever seen, I save them millions, I work my tail off, and in return, I get promoted, I get a raise, I get recognized. That's how it's supposed to work, right? Wrong, so wrong, see. Brad was watching, of course he was. He was always watching, not because he cared about the work, but because he cared about the credit. And as Marcus's account grew, as the numbers got bigger, as the contract got closer to being signed, Brad started circling, like a shark smelling blood in the water. First, it was little things. He'd show up to my meetings uninvited. He'd sit at the head of the table. Even though it was my client, he'd talk over me. He'd redirect Marcus's questions to himself. He'd say things like, "What my associate means to say is," and then he'd repeat exactly what I'd just said, but slower. And with more hand gestures, like he was translating from some foreign language. Then, it got bigger. He started CCing himself on every email. He started asking for copies of all my reports. He started reviewing my proposals, which meant rewriting them slightly and putting his name on them. And when I confronted him about it, when I walked into his office and said, "Brad, I feel like you're taking over my account," he just smiled that same creepy smile and he said, "Sport, I'm not taking over, I'm elevating. This client is too big for you to handle alone. You should be thanking me." Thanking him. He wanted me to thank him for stealing my work, but I didn't push back, not really, because Marcus's contract was still unsigned and I needed it to close. I needed to get it over the finish line, so I swallowed my pride. I let Brad play his games and I focused on Marcus, on making sure he was happy, on making sure he knew that I was the one doing the actual work, even if Brad was the one standing in the spotlight. And then, March 15th. The Ides of March, funny how that works out. I got to the office at 7:30 in the morning, which was early for me, but I wanted to prep for a big presentation. Marcus was supposed to sign the final contract that day. The multi-year deal, the one that would lock in Apex Industries for 3 years, minimum with options to extend, this was it. The moment everything changed, I walked in, coffee in hand, ready to conquer the world, and Brad was already there. Which was weird because Brad never got in before 9. Never, he was a 9:15 guy, 9:30 on Mondays. But there he was, sitting behind his desk, looking like he'd been there all night. His tie was loose, his eyes were red. And he was holding a folder and he looked at me, and he didn't smile, he didn't call me sport, he didn't call me champ, he just said, "Close the door, sit down." And I did, because what else was I going to do? I closed the door, I sat down, and I waited, and Brad, he opened that folder, and he pulled out a stack of papers, and he slid them across the desk, and he said, "Do you know what these are?" And I looked, and my heart stopped. Because they were emails, my emails printed out, highlighted, circled in red pen, emails between me and Marcus discussing alternative arrangements, side deals, commissions that would go directly to me, bypassing the company entirely. And I looked up at Brad, and I said, "These aren't real," and he nodded like he expected me to say that, and he said, "That's what they all say, that's what every thief says when they get caught." Thief. He called me a thief, and I stood up. And I said, "Brad, I don't know what those are, but I didn't write them. I would never, Marcus is my client, I would never go behind the company's back, you know that." And he laughed, this dry, hollow laugh, and he said, "Do I? Do I know that? Because what I know is that you've been meeting with Marcus outside of office hours. What I know is that you've been sending encrypted messages. What I know is that you stand to make a lot of money if this deal goes through. And even more if it goes through without the company's markup." And I was shaking, literally shaking, because none of it was true, not a single word. Yes, I'd met Marcus for coffee once at his request to discuss final details. Yes. I'd texted him about work, about timelines, about deliverables, but encrypted messages, side deals, commissions, no, never, I wouldn't even know how to set something like that up. But Brad, he had papers, he had documents. He had proof, or at least what looked like proof, and he slid another paper across the desk, and it was a termination letter, already signed, already dated with my name on it, and he said, "You're done, pack your things. Security will escort you out, and just so you know, Marcus is being informed of your termination as we speak. He's being told that you were attempting to steal his account, that you were running a side operation, that you can't be trusted, and he's being reassigned to me." And I couldn't speak, I literally couldn't speak. My mouth was open, but no words came out, just air and disbelief and this crushing weight on my chest. Like someone was sitting on me, and Brad, he stood up and he walked around the desk, and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "It's a shame, really, you had potential, but potential doesn't mean much when you're a criminal. Now get out of my office, and don't even think about a reference or unemployment, because I'm going to make sure everyone in this industry knows exactly what you did." And he opened the door, and there were 2 security guards waiting. Like they'd been staged, like this was a play, and I was the villain, and Brad was the hero, and I walked out, past my cubicle, past the gray walls and the popcorn smell, past my coworkers who wouldn't make eye contact, past the photos of my family that I kept on my desk, past the plant I'd been watering for 2 years, and I didn't say anything, because what do you say? What do you say when your life gets ripped apart in 5 minutes? When everything you've built gets turned to dust by a man in a shiny suit? I got in my car and I drove home, and I sat on my couch and I stared at the wall for 6 hours, didn't move, didn't eat, didn't cry, just stared. Because my brain couldn't process it, it was like trying to swallow a rock. It wouldn't go down, and then my phone rang, and it was Marcus, and I almost didn't answer, because what was I going to say? "Hey, sorry I got fired for allegedly stealing your account, want to grab lunch," but something made me pick up, something made me say, "Hello," and Marcus, his voice was different, not angry, not disappointed, just calm, too calm. And he said, "I need to see you tonight, 8 o'clock, the diner on 5th and Main, don't tell anyone, come alone." And I should have asked why, I should have been suspicious, but I wasn't, because I was desperate. Because I needed someone to believe me. And Marcus was the only person who knew my work, who knew my character, who knew that I would never do what Brad accused me of, so I said, "I'll be there," and I hung up. And I looked at the clock, it was 2 in the afternoon. 6 hours to wait, 6 hours of staring at that wall, 6 hours of my mind racing through every possible scenario. Was Marcus going to yell at me? Was he going to demand answers? Was he going to tell me that he believed Brad, that he was signing with Brad instead, that I was finished? The diner on 5th and Main was one of those places that time forgot. Red vinyl booths, chrome trim. A jukebox in the corner that played songs from the 50s. The kind of place where the coffee is always hot and the pie is always questionable, but it was quiet, and it was private, and that was exactly what I needed. I got there at 7:45, sat in a booth in the back, ordered coffee I didn't drink, and I waited, and at 8 o'clock exactly, the door opened, and Marcus walked in, but he didn't look like Marcus, not the Marcus I knew. The Marcus who wore gray suits and carried a leather briefcase. This Marcus, he was wearing jeans, a black jacket, no tie, no briefcase, and his posture was different, straighter, taller. Like he'd been pretending to be smaller than he actually was. And he slid into the booth across from me, and he looked at me, and he didn't say anything for a long time, just looked like he was studying me. Like he was deciding something, and finally, he spoke and he said, "I'm sorry for what happened to you today. I know you didn't do it. I know those emails were fake. I know Bradley set you up, and I need you to know. That wasn't supposed to happen, not yet. Not yet." Those two words, not yet, they hung in the air like smoke, and I said, "What do you mean, not yet?" And Marcus, he leaned forward, and he lowered his voice, and he said, "My name isn't Marcus, not really, and I'm not from Apex Industries. I'm an auditor hired by the parent company. The one that owns Velocity Solutions. I've been undercover for 8 months, investigating Bradley. And the corruption in your office, and you were never supposed to get caught in the crossfire, and the world tilted, like someone had grabbed the edges of reality and given them a shake, an auditor undercover for 8 months, and I was just sitting there in a diner in a booth, looking at a man who wasn't who he said he was, and trying to process words that didn't make sense, and I said, "I don't understand, you've been, what, spying on us?" And he shook his head, and he said, "Not spying, investigating, the parent company. They've been getting complaints about Velocity Solutions for years, missing funds, inflated invoices, clients being overcharged, and it all traced back to one person, Bradley. But we needed proof, solid proof, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. We needed to catch him in the act, so they sent me in, as a client, to see how he operated, to document everything." And I said, "But why me? Why did you pick me and Marcus, or whatever his name was?" He smiled, this small, genuine smile, and he said, "Because you were the only honest person in that office, the only one who actually cared about the work. The only one who wasn't cutting corners or padding invoices. I watched you for weeks before I ever approached you. I saw how you treated the small clients, the ones who didn't matter to Brad, the ones who got ignored. You gave them the same energy you gave me, and that's rare, that's valuable." And I felt something in my chest, this warmth, this validation. After the worst day of my life, someone was telling me that I was good, that I was real, that I mattered, but it was mixed with something else, something bitter. Because if he was an auditor, if he'd been watching, then why didn't he stop it? Why didn't he say something before Brad destroyed me? And I asked him, I said, "If you knew, if you saw what was happening, why didn't you protect me? Why did you let him fire me?" And his face changed, got serious, got dark, and he said, "Because I needed him to fire you. I needed him to cross that line. To fabricate evidence, to terminate an innocent employee for personal gain. That's the smoking gun, that's the proof the parent company needed, not the financial stuff, not the inflated invoices. They already knew about that. They needed to see who he really was, what he was capable of, and your termination, it's the final piece, it's what brings him down for good." And I sat back hard against the vinyl booth, and I said, "So I'm just, what, bait? Collateral damage, a pawn in your chess game?" And he didn't deny it, he just said, "Yes, and I'm sorry truly, but sometimes, to catch a predator, you have to let him strike, and you were never in real danger. I made sure of that. The emails he showed you, they were planted by me through a secure channel. I knew he'd find them, I knew he'd use them, I knew he'd fire you, because that's who he is. He can't help himself, and now, tomorrow morning, I'm going to walk into that office, and I'm going to reveal who I am, and I'm going to use your termination as evidence of his misconduct, and he's going to be fired on the spot. No severance, no references, just gone." And I should have been relieved, I should have been happy, but I wasn't. I was angry, furious, because this man, this stranger, had used me. He'd let me lose my job, my income, my reputation. He'd let me sit on my couch for 6 hours staring at a wall. He'd let me feel like the smallest person on earth. Also, he could build a case, and I said, "And what about me? What happens to me after you get your big moment? Do I get my job back? Do I get an apology? Do I get anything?" And he reached into his jacket, and he pulled out an envelope, and he slid it across the table, and he said, "You get this, open it." And I did, and inside was a letter on official parent company letterhead, and it said, "To whom it may concern, due to exceptional performance and demonstrated integrity, we are pleased to offer you the position of Regional Operations Manager, reporting directly to the parent company's Vice President of Logistics, effective immediately, salary, $120,000 annually, plus benefits, plus signing bonus, $120,000. I was making 45, and now, 120 plus a signing bonus, plus benefits, plus a title that I couldn't even say out loud without laughing. And I looked at him, and I said, "Is this real?" And he nodded. And he said, "It's real, but there's a condition. You have to be there tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock when I walk into that office, when I reveal everything. When Bradley gets his walking papers, you have to be there to see it, to witness it. Because you earned that, you earned the right to watch him fall." And I thought about it. I really did. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted to tell him to shove his job offer and his chess game and his undercover operation. Part of me wanted to walk away and never think about Velocity Solutions again. But the other part of me, the part that had sat on that couch for 6 hours, the part that had been called a thief by a man who was the actual thief, that part wanted to be there. That part needed to be there, needed to see the look on Brad's face when the world turned upside down, when the predator became the prey. When the king got checkmated by the pawn he thought he'd sacrificed, so I said, "I'll be there," and Marcus, he smiled, and he stood up, and he dropped a 20 on the table for the coffee, and he said, "One more thing. My real name is David Chen, and when this is over, I'd like to actually be your friend, not your client, not your auditor, just a guy who knows a good person when he sees one," and he walked out into the night. And I sat there in that red vinyl booth, holding a letter that would change my life, and I didn't cry, not then, I saved that for later. I didn't sleep that night, not for a single minute. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Brad, about David, about the emails that weren't real, about the job that I was losing and the job that I was gaining, about the look on my coworkers' faces when security walked me out, about the plant on my desk that I would never water again. And at 6 in the morning, I got up, I showered, I put on my best suit, the navy blue one, the one I wore to interviews, the one that made me feel like I could run a company, and I drove to Velocity Solutions. But I didn't park in the employee lot. I parked across the street, at a meter, and I waited. At 8:45, I saw David pull up. In a black sedan, not flashy but expensive. The kind of car that says I don't need to impress you. He got out, and he was wearing a suit now, a real suit, dark charcoal, tailored, power suit, and he straightened his tie. And he looked at his watch, and he waited. At 8:55, Brad's car pulled in. A silver BMW, lease payment probably higher than my rent. He got out, adjusted his sunglasses, checked his hair in the window reflection, and strutted toward the building, like he owned the place, like he'd already won, like he was the king of the castle and everyone else was just a peasant, and David watched him. And then David looked across the street, right at me. And he nodded just once, and I nodded back, and at 9 o'clock exactly, we walked in, together, through the front doors, past the reception desk, past the cubicles, past the gray walls and the popcorn smell, and people looked up. Confused because I wasn't supposed to be there, because I was fired, because I was a thief, because Brad had probably sent an email to the whole company explaining exactly that. And Brad, he was in his office, door open, feet on his desk, coffee in hand, probably drafting an email to Marcus about how he'd saved the account from my treachery, probably planning his victory lap, his bonus, his promotion, his moment in the sun. And David walked right up to his door. And he knocked 3 times, sharp, professional, and Brad looked up and he saw David, and his face lit up because he thought it was Marcus. He thought his golden goose had arrived. He thought the deal was about to close. He thought he was about to become the legend who saved Velocity Solutions, and he said, "Marcus, come in, I've got great news. We handled that little situation with the previous account rep. He's gone, out of the picture. And I'm personally taking over your account, so let's talk numbers, let's get this contract signed. I've got champagne in the mini fridge." And David, he didn't move, he just stood there in the doorway, looking at Brad with this expression. This mix of pity and disgust, like he was looking at a bug that had somehow learned to wear a tie, and he said, "My name isn't Marcus, and I'm not here to sign a contract." And Brad's smile faltered just a little, and he said, "What? What do you mean? Of course you're Marcus, Apex Industries, we've been working together for months." And David reached into his jacket, and he pulled out a badge, a real badge with a photo, and a name and a title, and he held it up. And he said, "My name is David Chen. I'm a senior auditor with the parent company, and I've been investigating this office for 8 months. Undercover, documenting fraud, documenting theft, documenting the systematic overcharging of clients, and yesterday, you provided me with the final piece of evidence I needed." And Brad, he laughed, this nervous, shaky laugh, and he said, "This is a joke, right? This is some kind of team-building exercise or a prank. Did corporate put you up to this? Because it's not funny, it's really not funny." And David didn't laugh, he didn't smile, he just said, "It's not a joke. And it's about to get a lot less funny for you, because yesterday, you terminated an employee named, what's his name again, the one you accused of stealing?" And Brad looked at me, standing in the hallway, behind David, in my navy blue suit, looking like I owned the place, because in that moment, I owned every second of it, and Brad's face went pale, like all the blood had drained out of it, like someone had pulled a plug, and he said, He's a thief, I have proof, I have emails, I have documentation." And David said, "You have fabricated evidence, planted documents, false allegations, used to terminate an innocent employee so you could steal his client. His work, his career, and I watched it happen, I documented it, I have recordings, I have transcripts, I have financial records showing that you've been skimming from client accounts for 3 years, and I have this," and he pulled out a folder, thick, heavy, full of paper, and he dropped it on Brad's desk, and the sound it made, it was like a gavel, like a judge's hammer, like the final nail in a coffin, and David said, "You're terminated. Effective immediately, no severance, no references, security will escort you out, and just so you know, the parent company is pressing charges, embezzlement, fraud, defamation, you're looking at real prison time. Not white-collar resort prison, real prison with real bars and real consequences." And Brad, he stood up, and he knocked over his coffee, it spilled across his desk, across the fake emails, across the termination letter he'd written for me, and he said, "You can't do this, you can't just walk in here and, this is my office, this is my company, I built this, I made this place." And David laughed, this dry, cold laugh. And he said, "You didn't build anything, you stole it. You stole from your employees, you stole from your clients, you stole from the company, and now, it's time to pay it back with interest." And he turned and he looked at me and he said, "This is your new regional operations manager. He starts today. And his first order of business, cleaning up the mess you made, every account you touched, every client you overcharged, every employee you mistreated. He's going to fix it because unlike you, he actually cares." And the office, it was silent, so silent you could hear the air conditioning humming, and every eye was on Brad, on his red face, on his shaking hands, On the coffee dripping off his desk, on the cheap suit that suddenly looked even cheaper. And Brad, he looked at me, and for a second, just a second, I saw something in his eyes, not anger, not rage, just defeat, pure, absolute defeat. Like a balloon that had been popped, like a fire that had been extinguished, like a king who just realized he was actually a jester, and always had been, and he said, you did this, you set me up. And I shook my head, and I said, no, Brad, you set yourself up, I just showed up for the finale. And security arrived, 2 guards, the same ones who'd walked me out, and they looked at Brad, and they looked at me, and they looked at David, and they knew. They knew exactly what was happening, because in the corporate world, justice is rare, but when it comes fast, and it comes hard, and Brad packed his things in a cardboard box, the same way I'd packed mine, except his box was smaller. Because he didn't have photos of his family, he didn't have a plant, he just had awards, plaques, certificates, all with his name on them, all for work that other people had done, and as he walked out, past the cubicles, past the gray walls, past the employees who wouldn't make eye contact with him, I watched. I didn't smile, I didn't laugh, I didn't cheer, I just watched, because this wasn't a victory, not really, it was a reckoning. It was the universe balancing its books. It was karma doing what karma does, slowly, quietly, but completely. And when he was gone, David turned to me and he said, welcome to your new office, it's the one at the end of the hall. Corner window, the one Brad always said was reserved for senior management. Well, now you're senior management, and that window, it's yours. And I walked to that office, slowly, like I was walking through a dream because it didn't feel real. None of it felt real, the carpet under my feet, the door with my name on it, not yet but soon, the desk, the chair, the view of the parking lot where I'd sat that morning, waiting, watching, hoping, and I sat down and I looked at David. And I said, why me? I mean, really, you could have picked anyone, any of the other reps, any of the senior staff, why give this to me? And David leaned against the doorframe, and he said, because I spent 8 months in this office. 8 months pretending to be someone else, 8 months watching how people work, and do you know what I learned? Most people, they do just enough, they punch the clock, they collect the check, they go home, they don't care about the company. They don't care about the clients, they don't care about each other. But you cared, you stayed late, you came in early, you remembered clients' birthdays, you fixed problems that weren't even yours, you treated this job like it mattered. And that's rare, that's 1 in 100, maybe 1 in 1,000, and when I find someone like that, I don't let them go to waste, not for Brad, not for anyone, and I felt it then. The tears I'd been holding back, they came. Not a flood, just a few sliding down my cheeks, warm, real, and I wiped them away and I said, thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. And David nodded and he said, don't thank me. Thank yourself, you did the work, you built the character, I just opened the door, you were the one who walked through it. And he left, and I sat there in that corner office, with the window and the view, and the nameplate that would soon have my name on it, and I thought about everything, about Brad, about the emails, about the firing, about the diner, about David, about the letter, about the suit, about the drive home, about the wall I'd stared at for 6 hours, and I picked up the phone and I called my mom and I said, hey, it's me. Remember that job I told you about, the one I lost? Well, I got a new one, a better one, and Mom, you're not going to believe how it happened. And she cried, of course she did. Moms always cry at the good stuff, and I cried too, a little, and we talked for an hour about nothing, about everything. About how life sometimes kicks you in the teeth, just so you can learn how strong your jaw is. So here's the thing, here's the moral, the lesson, the thing I want you to take away from this whole crazy story. The world is full of Brads. Full of people who take credit for what they didn't do, who cut corners, who climb ladders made of other people's backs, who smile while they stab, who call you sport and champ and buddy while they're plotting your destruction. And sometimes they win, sometimes they get the corner office, sometimes they get the bonus, sometimes they get away with it for a while, but here's what I learned, the Brads of the world, they always fall, always, maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Because you can't build a castle on a foundation of lies, it'll crumble, it has to, it's physics, it's karma, it's just how things work, and the people like me, the ones who show up, who do the work, who treat people with respect even when no one's watching, we don't always get rewarded right away. Sometimes we get fired, sometimes we get blamed, sometimes we sit on a couch for 6 hours wondering what the heck just happened. But eventually, someone notices, someone sees, someone like David, someone who understands that integrity isn't just a word on a motivational poster, it's a currency, and it pays dividends. Maybe not on the schedule you want, but always on the schedule you need. So if you're out there right now, if you're reading this, or listening to this, or however you're consuming this story, and you're in a job where your boss is a Brad, where you're doing the work and someone else is taking the credit, where you're staying late and they're leaving early, where you're building and they're destroying, I want you to know something. Don't stop, don't quit, don't become bitter. Don't let them turn you into them, because your moment is coming, your diner meeting, your letter, your corner office, your 9 o'clock reckoning, it's out there. And when it arrives, you want to be ready. You want to be wearing your best suit. You want to have your head held high. You want to be the person who can walk through that door and say, I earned this, not because I played the game, but because I refused to play dirty. Brad sent me an email about 6 months later. From a personal account, no subject line, just a paragraph, and it said, I know you think you won, but you didn't, you just got lucky, and luck runs out. And I thought about responding. I thought about writing something long and eloquent, something about character and karma and the difference between luck and preparation. But I didn't, I just deleted it, because Brad still didn't get it, he probably never would. And that was okay, because I didn't need him to understand, I just needed him to be gone, and he was, last I heard, he was selling insurance, door to door, in a town I'd never heard of, wearing a suit that was a little less shiny, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, still calling people champ, still taking credit for things he didn't do, still being Brad because leopards don't change their spots, and Brads don't change their stripes, but me, I changed. I grew, I learned that the corporate world isn't always fair, but it isn't always unfair either. That sometimes, the good guys do win, that sometimes, the truth comes out, that sometimes, the person who does the work gets the reward. And that sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's just living well, living honestly, living in a way that makes the Brads of the world irrelevant, because at the end of the day, they're not your competition, they're not your enemy. They're just a cautionary tale, a reminder of who not to be and what not to become, so yeah, that's my story. My boss fired me for stealing the company's top client, and the next morning, he realized who that client actually was, and in realizing that, he realized something else too. He realized that he'd spent his whole career climbing a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall, and when that ladder fell, there was nothing underneath him, nothing real, nothing solid, nothing true but me. I had something, I had my work, my integrity, my name, and a corner office with a pretty great view. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. And if you're dealing with a Brad right now, hang in there, your reckoning is coming, and when it does, make sure you're wearing your best suit. My fiancé's family kept hiding a locked photo album every time I visited, and when I finally looked inside, I found pictures of myself from 15 years ago. Yeah, you heard that right, pictures of me as a kid. In an album I'd never seen before, in a house I'd only been visiting for 8 months, and I promise you, the truth behind those photos, it changed everything I thought I knew about my own life. So look, let me back up, way up. Because this story doesn't start with a photo album, it starts with a girl and a coffee shop, and one of those moments where the universe just clicks. Her name is Emma, Emma Caldwell. And I met her in the spring of 2022. I was 26, she was 24, and I was in this little indie coffee shop near my apartment. The kind with exposed brick and plants everywhere and a barista who judges your order based on your aura. I was ordering an oat milk latte, because apparently that's who I was in my mid-20s, and she was behind me and she said, "Oat milk, really? You know that's just grain water, right?" And I turned around and there she was. 5'4", curly brown hair, freckles across her nose like someone had flicked a paintbrush at her. And these eyes, green, not fake contact green, real green like forest green. And she was smiling, not a polite smile. A challenging smile, the kind that says, "I dare you to have a personality," and I said, "Grain water, lady, this grain water costs $6.50, I'm basically drinking liquid gold." And she laughed, this big, genuine laugh, the kind that makes other people in the coffee shop turn and look, and she said, "Okay, fair, but if you're going to waste $6.50, at least get the extra shot. Otherwise you're just drinking beige disappointment." And that was it, that was the whole conversation. She ordered her black coffee, like a psychopath, no sugar, no cream, just coffee, and she walked out, and I stood there, holding my grain water, watching the door close behind her, and I thought, I'm going to marry that girl. Now, here's the thing, I'm not usually that guy. I'm not the love at first sight guy. I'm the let's see how this goes guy. The take it slow guy, the guy who analyzes text messages for 3 hours before responding. But with Emma, there was no slow, there was just forward motion. Like we'd been orbiting each other for years and finally gravity took over. We started dating, properly, dinners, movies, long walks where we'd talk until our feet hurt. She was a kindergarten teacher, which, if you know any kindergarten teachers, you know they're either saints or completely unhinged. Emma was both. She could handle 20 screaming 5-year-olds at 9 in the morning and then quote obscure philosophy at dinner. She was everything I didn't know I needed, and 6 months in, I met her family. And that's where this story really starts, because up until that point, everything was normal, better than normal, it was perfect, but families are where the buried bodies live, metaphorically speaking, at least. I hoped it was metaphorical. Emma's parents lived in this old Victorian house about 40 minutes outside the city, the kind with a wraparound porch and a swing that creaked, and a garden that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Her mom, Mrs. Caldwell, was this warm, round woman who hugged me before I even introduced myself. She smelled like cinnamon and laundry detergent, the good kind. The kind that makes you think of home even if you never had a good one. And her brother, Jake, 2 years older than Emma, quiet, built like a linebacker but gentle like a librarian, he worked in construction. And he had this habit of studying people, like really studying them, not in a creepy way, in a, I'm trying to figure out if you're good enough for my sister way, which, fair, I'd do the same thing, but her dad, Mr. Caldwell, he wasn't there, and when I asked about him, at dinner that first night, the table went quiet, not awkward quiet, but heavy quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight, and Emma reached over and took my hand, and she said, "He passed away. 5 years ago, heart attack, he was 52. And I felt terrible, of course I did. I felt like I'd walked into a room and tripped over a funeral, and I apologized profusely, and Mrs. Caldwell, she patted my hand. And she said, "It's okay, sweetie, we talk about him all the time, he'd want us to, he was the kind of man who filled up a room, you'd have loved him." And I nodded, and I believed her, because even in death, you could feel him in that house. There were photos everywhere, not in a creepy shrine way, just present, a man with a mustache and kind eyes and broad shoulders, wearing a firefighter's uniform in some pictures, a fishing vest in others. Holding a trophy fish in one, holding Emma as a baby in another. He was everywhere, and dinner was great, honestly. Mrs. Caldwell made pot roast, the kind that falls apart when you look at it. And Jake loosened up after 2 beers, and we talked about sports and movies and whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Emma said yes, I said absolutely not. Mrs. Caldwell said she didn't care as long as people were happy. And Jake said nothing because he was too busy eating his 3rd slice. But here's where it gets weird. The first time I noticed it, the album, we were in the living room after dinner, full bellies, warm fire. That comfortable post-meal silence where everyone's just existing together. And I was looking around, at the bookshelves, at the knickknacks, at the life this family had built over decades, and on the coffee table, there was a photo album, a big one. Leather-bound, dark green with a little gold clasp, the kind that locks, and I didn't think much of it at first, just, oh, a photo album, families have those. But then Mrs. Caldwell walked in from the kitchen, carrying pie. And she saw where my eyes were, and she froze just for a second, a tiny fraction of a moment, but I saw it, the freeze, the micro-expression. And then she set the pie down, and she picked up the album, casually, too casually, and she said, "Oh, this old thing, just junk photos, nothing interesting." And she carried it into the other room, the den, and I heard a drawer close, and she came back, smiling like nothing happened, and I looked at Emma, and she was looking at her mom. And there was something in her eyes, something I couldn't read, not guilt, not exactly, but awareness, like she knew what just happened, and she chose not to say anything, and I should have asked, right then I should have said, "Hey, what was that about?" But I didn't, because I was the new boyfriend. I was still in the proving myself phase, and you don't start interrogating people about their photo albums in the proving yourself phase. That's relationship suicide. So I let it go, I ate my pie, I complimented Mrs. Caldwell's crust, I laughed at Jake's terrible jokes, and I filed the moment away under, weird but probably nothing, but it wasn't nothing because it happened again. The second visit 3 weeks later, Easter weekend, I brought flowers, tulips, because Emma said her mom loved tulips, and Mrs. Caldwell hugged me again, and Jake shook my hand, and we had ham and deviled eggs. And this potato salad that I'm pretty sure had some kind of addictive substance in it because I ate 4 servings. And after dinner, we were in the living room again, and there it was, the same album, same leather, same gold clasp. Same spot on the coffee table, like it had never moved, and this time, I was going to say something, I was going to make a joke about it, like, "Mrs. Caldwell, you trying to tempt me with mystery photos," something light. Something funny, but before I could open my mouth, Jake reached over and he picked it up and he said, "Mom, you left this out again." And Mrs. Caldwell, she was in the doorway and her face went pale just for a second and she said, "Oh yes, thank you Jake, I'll put it away." And she took it from him and she walked it to the den and again, the drawer, the closing sound, and when she came back, she was smiling but it didn't reach her eyes, and Emma. She was sitting next to me on the couch. And she squeezed my hand hard like, "Don't ask, don't say anything, just let it go," so I did, again, but now I was curious, actually curious, because once is a coincidence. Twice is a pattern, and 3 times is a conspiracy. I waited until we were driving home, Emma and me, in my car, and I said, "Okay, what's the deal with the album?" And she didn't pretend not to know what I was talking about. She just sighed this long, tired sigh and she said, "It's nothing, it's just family stuff, old photos, my mom gets weird about it, she's sentimental." And I said, "Sentimental? She hides it like it's the nuclear codes." She literally snatched it off the table when she saw me looking at it. And Emma was quiet for a long time, just watching the streetlights pass by the window, and then she said, "I know it seems weird, but I promise you, it's not what you think, there's nothing bad in there, nothing sinister, it's just complicated, and my mom will explain it when she's ready. Can you just trust me, can you let it go for now?" And I looked at her, and those green eyes. And I thought, I've known this girl for 6 months, and she's never lied to me, not once. She's never given me a reason not to trust her, so if she says let it go, I should let it go, so I said, "Okay. For now," and she smiled and she leaned over and she kissed my cheek and she whispered, "Thank you. But here's the thing about curiosity. It doesn't go away just because you agree to let it go. It goes underground, it festers, it grows. Like a weed in the dark, and every time I visited that house, every holiday, every Sunday dinner, every random Tuesday when Mrs. Caldwell insisted I come over because she'd made too much lasagna, I looked for the album. And I started noticing things, little things, like how Mrs. Caldwell would always check the coffee table before I arrived, like she'd move a vase or a book or a remote control to cover a spot, a specific spot, where the album usually sat, and how Jake would sometimes slip. He'd say things like, "Remember when Dad pulled that kid out of the," and then he'd stop mid-sentence, and Mrs. Caldwell would clear her throat. And Jake would change the subject, fast, and how Emma, my Emma, would sometimes look at me in this way, this intense, searching way, like she was looking for something, like she was waiting for me to remember something, but I didn't know what. I didn't know what I was supposed to remember. And then, the incident, the one that changed everything, it was Thanksgiving, 2023. We'd been together for almost a year and a half, and I was going to propose. I had the ring in my pocket, a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing flashy. Emma wasn't flashy, she was real, and I wanted to ask her that weekend, in front of her family, because they were my family now too, at least. They felt like they were, and the dinner was amazing. Turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce from actual cranberries, not the can, the real stuff, and we were all there, me, Emma, Jake, Mrs. Caldwell, and 2 of Emma's aunts, and a cousin. The house was full. Loud, happy, the way holidays are supposed to be, and after dinner, everyone was in the living room, full, tired, watching football, or pretending to watch football while actually napping, and I got up to use the bathroom. And on my way back, I passed the den, and the door was open, just a crack, and inside, I saw it, the album on the desk, not in the drawer, out in the open. Like someone had been looking at it and forgot to put it away, and I stopped. I know I should have kept walking, I know I should have gone back to the couch, but I didn't because by that point, the curiosity had turned into something else, something heavier. It wasn't just wondering anymore, it was needing to know. It was this pressure in my chest that said, if you don't look now, you'll never know, and you'll always wonder, so I pushed the door open just a little, just enough, and I stepped inside. The den was dark. Just the light from the hallway spilling in, and I walked to the desk, slowly, Like I was walking through a dream or a nightmare, I didn't know which yet, and I looked at the album, the leather, the gold clasp, and I saw something I hadn't noticed before. There was a tiny inscription on the cover, etched into the leather, faded, hard to read, but I leaned close and I made out the words, "For Emma." The day everything changed, and my heart started pounding, because what did that mean? The day everything changed, what day, what happened? And I reached for the clasp and it was locked, a tiny keyhole, no combination, just a lock. And I thought, okay, locked, that's it, I can't open it, I should walk away, I should definitely walk away. But then I noticed something under the album, a key, a small brass key, just sitting there like it had been left out by accident, or like it had been left out on purpose, and I picked it up and my hands were shaking, actually shaking, like I was cold, but I wasn't cold, I was terrified because whatever was in this album, it was big, it was important, and it was about to change everything. And I put the key in the lock and I turned it and I heard the click, the tiniest click like a gunshot in the silence, and I opened the cover. The first page was a newspaper clipping, yellowed, fragile. From 15 years ago, 2008, the headline read, "Local hero saves 8-year-old boy from frozen lake." And I froze because I was 8 years old in 2008, and I had almost drowned. In a frozen lake in my hometown, 2 hours from here, and I turned the page and there was a photo, a color photo, blurry, taken from a distance, but clear enough, a man in a red jacket carrying a small boy wrapped in a blanket. The boy's face was visible, just barely, blue lips, closed eyes, but recognizable, and I recognized him because it was me. I was the boy, I was the 8-year-old in the photo. I was the kid who fell through the ice. I was the one who was saved. And the man carrying me, the man in the red jacket, I looked closer at his face, at his mustache, at his broad shoulders, and I knew him too. I'd seen his face 100 times in the photos on the walls, in the stories they told. In the eyes of the woman who hugged me like I was already her son. It was Mr. Caldwell, Emma's father. He was the one who saved me, and I turned the page, and there were more photos, photos of me in the hospital, photos of my parents, photos of the news crew, photos of Mr. Caldwell being interviewed, being called a hero, wearing his firefighter's uniform, smiling that kind smile, the one I'd seen in all the pictures around the house, and then photos I didn't recognize, photos taken later, months later, maybe years, of me at a little league game, me at a school play, me at a birthday party, photos that someone had taken from a distance without me knowing. Without my parents knowing, and my brain, it couldn't process it. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose, too much, too fast, too impossible. Why did they have these photos? Why were they watching me? Why did Emma's father save me? Why did they keep it secret? Why hide the album? Why act like I was just some random guy Emma met at a coffee shop? And then, the worst thought, the thought that made my stomach drop out of my body, was Emma. Was she part of this? Did she seek me out? Did she find me on purpose? Was our whole relationship? Was it planned? Was I some kind of project, a charity case, a debt they felt they needed to repay? The room spun, literally spun. I had to grab the desk to stay upright, and I heard a noise behind me, a gasp, and I turned around, and there was Mrs. Caldwell standing in the doorway with Emma, and Jake, all of them looking at me, looking at the open album. Looking at my face, and they knew that I knew, and Mrs. Caldwell, she put her hand over her mouth, and her eyes filled with tears, and she said, oh no, no, you weren't supposed to see that, not yet. Not like this, and I looked at Emma, and my voice, it came out broken, cracked like a dry riverbed, and I said, did you know who I was before we met? Did you find me? Did you plan this? And Emma's face went white, like she'd seen a ghost, and she took a step toward me, and she said, no, I didn't plan it, I swear, I didn't even know at first, not until I brought you home. Not until my mom saw you, and she recognized you. She recognized your face from the photos, from the news, from all the years my dad talked about you. And I shook my head, because none of this made sense, none of it, and I said, why? Why would he talk about me? Why would he take photos of me? Why would any of you? And Mrs. Caldwell walked into the room, slowly, like she was approaching a wild animal, and she sat down in the chair by the desk. And she patted the other chair, and she said, sit down, sweetie, please just sit down and let me explain. Let me tell you the whole story, before you think things that aren't true. Before you ruin something beautiful because we were cowards, and I didn't want to sit, I wanted to run. I wanted to get in my car and drive until I ran out of gas, but something in her voice, something in those words, cowards. It made me stop, it made me listen, so I sat and I waited, and Mrs. Caldwell took a deep breath and she started to talk. 15 years ago, my husband, David, he was a firefighter and a volunteer EMT. And one February afternoon, he got a call. A boy had fallen through the ice on Miller's Pond. The ice was thin, the water was freezing, and the boy, he was 8 years old. He'd been under for almost 4 minutes by the time anyone saw him. 4 minutes in freezing water, that's usually too long, usually that's the end. And she paused, and she wiped her eyes, and she continued. But David, he didn't wait for backup, he didn't wait for the proper equipment. He tied a rope around his waist, and he went in through the ice, into that black water, and he found you. He found you under the ice, not breathing, blue, gone. And he pulled you out and he performed CPR, right there on the frozen bank for 7 minutes. 7 minutes of compressions and breaths while your mother screamed, while your father prayed, while the other responders watched. Because they thought you were gone, they all thought you were gone. And I felt it, the memory, buried so deep I'd almost forgotten it. The cold, the dark, the feeling of not being able to breathe, and then warmth and light and a voice. Telling me to stay, telling me not to go, telling me to come back, and Mrs. Caldwell said, but you came back, you started breathing, you started crying, and David, he sat there in the snow, in his wet uniform, holding you. And he cried too, he told me later, he said, Margaret, I looked at that boy and I saw our Jake, I saw our Emma, I saw every kid I'd ever known, and I knew I couldn't let him go. And she smiled, this sad, beautiful smile, and she said, After that, he became obsessed, not in a bad way, in a protective way. He checked on you through the years. He'd drive by your school. He'd watch your little league games. He'd make sure you were okay. He never approached you, never talked to you. He didn't want to scare you or your parents. He needed to know you were thriving, that his risk meant something, that you lived, really lived. And she turned the page of the album to a photo of me at graduation, high school, wearing a cap and gown, smiling, and she said, he was there in the back, watching. He cried when you walked across that stage. He said, that kid's going to do great things. I can feel it, and I couldn't speak. My throat was closed tight like a fist, and I looked at Emma, and she was crying too, quiet tears slipping down her cheeks, and Mrs. Caldwell said, when David died 5 years ago, he made me promise, he made all of us promise. He said, if that boy ever comes into our lives, if Emma ever brings him home, if fate somehow puts him in our path, don't tell him right away, don't overwhelm him. Don't make him feel like he owes us, don't make him feel like he's part of some destiny he didn't choose. Let him fall in love with her, or don't, let it be real, let it be natural, and when the time is right, when he's truly family, then tell him, then show him, then let him know that he was loved before he even knew us. And she reached out and she took my hand and she said, we didn't seek you out, sweetie. Emma didn't know. Not until that first dinner when I saw your face, when I saw those eyes, that nose, that scar on your chin, from the ice, I knew exactly who you were. And I told Emma, after you left that night, I showed her the album. And she was shocked, she was overwhelmed, she wanted to tell you immediately, but I begged her not to. I said, your father wanted it this way, he wanted him to choose us, not because of what happened, but because of who we are. And Emma, she agreed, reluctantly, because she loved you. And she didn't want to start that love with a secret, but she also didn't want to lose you, because what if you thought we were crazy? What if you thought we were stalkers? What if you ran? And I looked at Emma and I said, is that true, all of it? And she nodded, and she walked over and she knelt in front of me, and she took both my hands and she said, I fell in love with you because you made terrible jokes about oat milk, because you remembered my students' names, because you held my hair when I had food poisoning and you didn't complain once, because you're kind, because you're patient. Because you're you, not because my dad saved you, not because of some cosmic debt. I didn't even know the full story until after our third date, and by then, I was already gone, already yours, and I was terrified every day that you'd find out and think it was all a lie, but it isn't, I swear. And I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw it, the truth, it was there, in her eyes, in the way her hands shook, in the way she was begging me to believe her. It was real, all of it, but I was still confused, still hurt, still angry, and I said, but the album, you hid it every time, you treated it like a dirty secret, like something shameful, if this is such a beautiful story. Why hide it? And Jake, who had been silent this whole time, he finally spoke, and his voice was rough, thick with emotion, and he said, because we were scared, because my dad, he was a good man, the best man. And we didn't want his memory to be weaponized. We didn't want you to feel like you had to marry Emma because you owed our family something. We didn't want gratitude to become chains. My dad saved you because that's who he was. Not because he wanted something in return, and the last thing he would have wanted, the absolute last thing, was for you to feel trapped, obligated, owned. And he walked over, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, we messed up, we should have told you, we should have trusted you, but we were trying to honor a dead man's wishes, and we were trying to protect you, and we were trying to protect Emma, and in doing all of that, we probably hurt you. And for that, I'm sorry, we're all sorry. And I sat there, in that dark den, surrounded by photos of a life I barely remembered, photos taken by a man who had died before I ever got to thank him, photos hidden by a family who loved me before they even knew me, and I felt everything, anger, gratitude, confusion, love, fear, peace, all of it swirling together like a storm inside my chest, and I looked at the ring in my pocket. The one I'd been carrying all day, the simple gold band, the one I'd planned to give Emma that weekend, and I thought, do I still do this? Can I still do this? Is this too much, too weird, too destined? And then I thought about the coffee shop, about the oat milk joke, about the black coffee psychopath, about the way Emma laughed, the way she taught 20 screaming 5-year-olds, the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she loved me, not because of her father, not because of a frozen lake, but because of me, because of us, and I pulled out the ring, and the room went silent, again, but this time, it was a different silence, a hopeful silence, a holding our breath silence, and I looked at Emma. And I said, I was going to ask you tonight, at dinner, in front of everyone, but I think your dad would have liked this better, just us, just family. And I got down on one knee, in that dark den, surrounded by ghosts and memories and secrets finally told, and I said, Emma Caldwell, I don't care how we found each other. I don't care about frozen lakes or photo albums or secrets kept too long. I care about you. About us, about the life we're going to build. Will you marry me, not because of destiny, but because I choose you every day for the rest of my life? And she didn't say yes, not right away, she just collapsed into me, crying, laughing, holding me so tight I couldn't breathe, and she whispered, yes, yes, 1,000 times yes, I choose you too, I choose you forever. And Mrs. Caldwell was crying, and Jake was wiping his eyes, and I was crying too. The kind of crying that doesn't feel like weakness. It feels like release, like a dam breaking, like finally, being able to feel everything you'd been holding back. And later that night, after the aunts had gone home, after the cousin had left, after Mrs. Caldwell had gone to bed with a smile on her face, Emma and I sat on that porch swing, the one that creaked, and we looked at the stars, and she said, are you sure about us, about this? It's a lot. I know it's a lot, and I thought about it. I really did. I thought about the weight of it, the story we'd carry, the story we'd tell our kids someday about their grandfather, the hero, the man who saved their father, the man who watched from a distance, who loved without asking for anything back, and I said, I'm sure, because here's the thing about your dad. He didn't save me because he wanted me to marry his daughter. He saved me because I was a kid who needed saving. And everything after that, the coffee shop, the dates, the love, the porch swing, that's ours, that's just ours, and he would have wanted that. He would have wanted us to have something that was just ours. Not his, not Destiny's, just ours. And Emma leaned her head on my shoulder and she said, he would have loved you, not because of the lake, but because of who you are, because you're good, because you're patient. Because you make terrible oat milk jokes. And I laughed and I held her and we sat there until the stars faded, until the sun came up, until the world felt new again. We got married the following spring in a small ceremony. In Mrs. Caldwell's garden, the one that looked like a magazine, and Jake walked Emma down the aisle because someone had to, and I wore a suit, not a shiny one, a real one, navy blue, clean, simple. And Mrs. Caldwell sat in the front row, holding the album, the leather one, the one with the gold clasp, and during the ceremony, she opened it to a photo of Mr. Caldwell in his uniform, smiling that kind smile, and she whispered, "We did it, David, we told him, he knows, and he still chose us." And I heard her because she wanted me to, and I looked at that photo, at the man who had pulled me from the ice, who had breathed life back into me, who had watched me grow, who had loved me from afar, and I thought, thank you not for saving my life, though I am grateful, but for teaching me what love looks like, what family looks like, what it means to care for someone without needing anything back. And then I looked at Emma, in her white dress, with her curly hair and her freckles and her green eyes, and I thought, this is it. This is the life he wanted for me. Not because he planned it, but because he hoped for it. He hoped I'd be happy. He hoped I'd find love. He hoped I'd thrive. And I did. I am. I will. So here's the moral. The thing I want you to take away from this whole crazy story. Sometimes people keep secrets because they're afraid, not because they're malicious, not because they're manipulative, but because they love you so much they're terrified of losing you. And yes, secrets can hurt. They can wound. They can make you question everything. But before you judge the people who kept them, try to understand why. Try to see the fear behind the silence, the love behind the lock, and also, fate is a funny thing. Some people call it destiny, some people call it coincidence. I don't know what I call it, but I know this. The universe has a way of bringing people together, of weaving stories you could never have imagined, of connecting hearts across time and space in ways that don't make sense until they do. Emma's dad saved me when I was 8, and 15 years later, I fell in love with his daughter without knowing, without planning, without any idea that our lives had already touched, that our stories were already intertwined, that our hearts were already connected by a frozen lake and a brave man and a love that transcended everything. Was it destiny? Maybe. Maybe not, maybe it was just life, being beautiful, being strange, being more than we can understand, but whatever it was, I'm grateful for it, for the secret album, for the hidden photos, for the locked drawer, for the truth that finally came out, for the tears, for the forgiveness, for the porch swing, for the yes, for the life we're building. And if you're out there right now, and someone in your life is keeping a secret, or if you're the one keeping it, I hope you find the courage to open the album, to turn the page, to tell the truth, because on the other side of that fear, there's something beautiful waiting, something worth the risk, something worth the wait. Emma and I still visit that house. Every Sunday, for dinner, Mrs. Caldwell still makes too much lasagna, Jake still tells terrible jokes, and the album, it sits on the coffee table now, open, unlocked for anyone to see, because it was never meant to be hidden. It was meant to be shared when the time was right, and the time, finally, is right. If you made it this far, thanks for listening, and if you have someone who saved you once, literally or figuratively, maybe give them a call. Or just think about them for a minute, because sometimes, the people who change our lives never even know they did, and sometimes, they know exactly, and they spend their whole lives hoping we're okay. Peace.